So thank you all again for joining us for another MassMEDIC virtual town hall. This is a program that we are incredibly excited about and proud of, and it's so great to see so many of you again for another session. So many of you have been with us before, but for those of you that have not, I am Rachel Robinson, Vice President of MassMEDIC. And like I said, we are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us. If you have questions throughout the program, we absolutely encourage them. The best way to submit those is through the chat option at the bottom of your screen. Also, just a little housekeeping, remember to keep yourself on mute so that we don't have any background noise for our speakers, as we do have an incredible program today. So with that, I'm going to get things turned over to Brian Johnson to kick things off.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is an absolute pleasure because today we get to hear from one of the most impactful people in our government, Chairman Richie Neal from Massachusetts' 1st District. Not only is he a terrific partner to the medtech industry, he is chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, which means that pretty much everything that happens in the US government passes through his office. So he's a busy, busy man, and we are honored by his presence here today. Before we jump into the questions, though, I want to thank our sponsors for today's program, Greenlight Guru and RQM Plus. We couldn't produce these programs without your help. Chairman Neal, thank you so much for joining us. I know we had to push this around a little bit to accommodate for the president's address last night. I kind of asked you in the warm up here.
I generally go along with that.
Yeah, I couldn't help as I watched the president's speech and see the ambitious agenda he's laying out. The absolute feeling you must have felt of, boy, that's going to be a lot of work to get all that through. Give me your take on what you saw last night from your perspective, and how do you feel today?
Well, I was, in particular, I was very pleased, Brian, and thanks to MassMEDIC. You've been terrific. You're on the cutting edge of just about every big breakthrough in American society, and how impactful that is on the economy. But one of the most pleasing moments last night for me was the civil tone that the president adopted in laying out his plan. I thought it was calming, it was refreshing, it did not involve finger pointing. The two of us would very much share a similar idea about institutional knowledge, the rhythms of legislating, how it's done, and why we don't have to keep the base agitated 24 hours a day, keep them worked up about things that are never going to happen. And instead, he calmly and in sequencing form laid out what it is that he wants to do. And repeatedly, I was talking to him last night afterwards, and we really shared a few laughs too. We were talking about different speeches that we had heard and participated in with State of the Union addresses, and he had some very colorful comments. I thought it was pretty good when we were laughing. And I did remind him, he said, geez, I'm sorry I kept you here this long. I said, well, Mr. President, Bill Clinton used to keep us here until 5 of 11. And I said, and it was on purpose to keep the 11 o'clock pundits from getting in any time to comment on his speech. People used to say Clinton talks for a long time. We used to all know it's a strategy. The pundits couldn't pull up their laptops and comment on everything he had to say. So, I mean, they go right to work, and for people like myself, I thought the more welcoming or more refreshing parts of the president's address, he has repeatedly said, give me your suggestions. I mean, he's smart enough to lay out architecture, understanding that in the end, it will be Congress that drafts the construction plan. And the other part of the Biden administration, I'll just submit this to you, I think he's the only Democrat who's going to get elected president. I mean, when you consider what happened in Texas, he didn't spend 10 cents and he won easily. All of a sudden, all these Democrats across the country said, if you want to win this election, you need somebody with that demeanor. And I think that he would understand, again, the flow of legislative life. But when I've been, as you might expect in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been hearing from a lot of different interests. And I was talking to my tax staff yesterday at the committee. I said, You know what's great about the conversations we've had from some pretty big interested parties? They said, nobody has said no yet.
Right.
So the fluidity of the conversation is everything. I mean, he's dead earnest about infrastructure on the physical side. I've got some thoughts as to how this could be accomplished. My plan is to keep the Republicans in the game for as long as I can. You always get better and more lasting legislation if you can get the parties to cooperate. And Brian, just a reminder of what we've done in the Ways and Means Committee in the last 2 years. How about USMCA, the largest hemispheric trade agreement in American history? 195 Democrats voted for a trade agreement and 194 Republicans voted for it. And Chamber of Commerce endorsed it, US Chamber of Commerce, the Teamsters endorsed it, the AFL-CIO endorsed it. I mean, that's what I want to do. On the retirement front, look what we've done. It's extraordinary. And we're going to do more starting next Tuesday. It'll be done in a bipartisan way. And for those of you in Massachusetts, one of the biggest issues that doctors and hospitals had that I will tell you I single-handedly pushed through with the help of Kevin Brady, however, on the Republican side, that was surprise billing. These were big issues, unanimously passed in the Ways and Means Committee. Now, I'm not naive. We all agree on the need for infrastructure. There's certainly less agreement on the whole idea of revenue. So
Right.
I've also been around long enough to submit the following to you. So I've advised members of the Ways and Means Committee and the Speaker, we should not be in the process of volunteering revenue. Let's again, as I've said to members, tell me what you want. What do you desire of? What long-held legacy issue have you attempted to find revenue for? And then just tell me what you're willing to vote for afterwards. So when you volunteer revenue in Washington, the opposition mounts instantly. So
right.
Jay Powell said a lot of good things yesterday. I hope everybody paid attention.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to jump into some questions specific to our industry, if you don't mind. Actually, we could have had better timing for this program because the second half of this program is dealing with the impact of Brexit on the medtech industry. I was hoping you might be able to update us on the United Kingdom, United States Free Trade Agreement and what hurdles need to be overcome to finalize it.
Well, as you know, I've taken a long interest in that issue. And the problem that we have before us is Brexit. The other issues can be finessed, but I have forewarned with the support of the Speaker and the President that if there is any threat to the Good Friday Agreement or any attempt to reestablish a border between the Republic of Ireland and the North of Ireland, there is not going to be any trade agreement. And you should know that we want a trade agreement with the UK. And as recently as last week, the Prime Minister sent one of his top emissaries to visit me. He's had Dominic Raab come to visit me, his foreign minister. I hear from the British Embassy daily, and I am repeatedly reassured that the Good Friday Agreement is the only way forward. I helped participate in that. And we ended the longest standing political dispute in the history of the world, and everybody who was a partner to that agreement, of which America is a guarantor, everybody gave up something to get the agreement. So there can be no backtracking on it. There can be no effort to compromise. I think that one of the political parties, they were offered 3 different deals and they flubbed each one of them. Now, do I think it's a good idea to have a trade agreement with the UK? Yes, I do. Do I want one? Yes, I do. And if we are reassured that there is no threat to the Good Friday Agreement, and by the way, Catherine Tai, as you know, she used to work for me. And I was talking to her last week, and I would encourage all of you to she did an interview with Kai Rizdal last week on one of those business forecasts. And she knocked it out of the park. She was just great. And she's got a feisty side to her, which she was only too happy to display during that interview. And but when she called me last week, she pointed out to me, she said, you know, Mr. Chairman, she said, they're talking to me all the time, and I'm telling them that I am deferring to your judgment on this. So again, do we want it? Yes. And the price for them, incidentally, is very small. Leave the success of the Good Friday Agreement alone.
Excellent. And I mean, so I mean, you kind of teased a little bit of this as we talked about it, but I'm curious. So the president lays out a series of massive programs that involve substantial investments. You know, I'm not going to, you know, sort of the question, I guess, is not only just how realistic is it that programs like this make into law, but I think it's actually more interesting if you could help us understand the sequencing. You know, he's laid out 2 or 3 very large, you know, visions, and you know, how are you, and you're taking in and you're talking to your membership, but is there a sequencing that we should look for in terms of how this is going?
Yes. I know I can just keep it amongst us, right?
Absolutely.
So my plan is to try to wed the 2 proposals. I think that's a challenge. So the subsequent position will be, if I can get them in on physical infrastructure, highways, roadways, bridges, airports, rail, sewer, and water, broadband expansion. I mean, he used some pretty, I thought, good examples last night when you consider the number of children that receive their water through lead pipes. When you look at the highway system in America, any of you who have flown formerly from Gate 35X, that sign ought to be in the Smithsonian. And I think that, you know, I said to Governor Baker, who I've got a great relationship with, I said to Governor Baker, as I've been pushing and touting rail from Boston to Worcester to Springfield and on to Pittsfield, I've said to the governor, have you ever been in traffic at the Sturbridge exit on the turnpike? And he laughed because he knows the example. And I would submit this, Brian, and you would reinforce it because you know it. Infrastructure used to be the easiest thing to do, the physical infrastructure. I am a defender of the earmarking process. I think that might ease some of the tensions, but I'm not naive about it. So my plan is, if I can get them, which I think is unlikely, to do everything at once on the other side, I am open to splitting it off. And that means we would do the first part of it, as I've described, on a bipartisan basis, hopefully. I've talked to Kevin about this, Kevin Brady. And remember, part of the red states' challenge is in broadband. 1 out of 3 households in America doesn't have broadband. So I think that's an enticement for them. And I think they tend to drive longer distances in the red states. I think that's an enticement. And I know that they don't like tolling anymore, although that was at one time, as you know, the Republican answered everything until they found out what happened in Indiana. So that's not on the top of the agenda. So when I discuss these things, I really listen to what the other side has to say. And if I have to split them to get to, I want the child credit to be made permanent on the human care side. I think that would go a long way addressing one of the most stubborn problems that we have in America, and that's childhood poverty. So the refundability that we built in, that will expire in a year, I think that I've been listening to what Mitt Romney's had to say, what Marco Rubio has had to say, and it's pretty interesting. They acknowledge the problem, even though we disagree on how to pay for it. And if we had to do that, maybe, I'm just volunteering this, nothing absolute about what I'm going to say. If we had to consider reconciliation there, I don't like reconciliation. If we can avoid it, I would prefer to. It's a pretty arcane process, and it tends to leave a bad taste in the mouths of the losing side. And then that generates comeuppance, which I also think is too much a part of legislative life now.
Right, exactly. So, and just sort of in the sequencing, and just so that people who can understand a little bit better, because I mean, I think it's a rare opportunity we get to talk to someone like yourself, you know, a real parliamentarian. I mean, the president lays out a vision, and then it's your job in Congress to create bills out of these. So, do you have broad discretion to sort of pick out policies that work within this spectrum, or is it, are you going infrastructure, then families, and then healthcare, things like that?
Yeah. I think that likely it would be infrastructure and then the family side of it. I think the target ought to be July 4th for at least the major part of it. And the reason for that is because we're going to begin hearings. And after we get done with the retirement bill next week, we're going to do hearings after that on the infrastructure bill and the physical side of it. But I'll just share this with you. I think that we need to get it all done by August, the August break, because as you know, in congressional life, when we come back from August, then candidacies start to form across the country. They used to wait until January or February of an election year. And now, you take the oath and you've got an opponent. And so I'm more respectful of the idea that let's get this behind us. I've had a couple of hilarious conversations with Democrats where they've laid out these massive plans. And then at the end of the plan said to me, but after all, Mr. Chairman, I can never vote to increase the gas tax. So diplomacy overtook me, and I listened carefully. And they said, well, I just hope that for legacy purposes, not volunteering revenue, I said, I hope that for legacy purposes, you'll consider what it is you want and then link that to the need for revenue at some point. So I'm actually open to a lot of these suggestions, and the president knows that because he come from the same perspective. We want a win for the American family here. We don't want I told you so moment.
Right. Let me go a little bit deeper into the medtech industry, because one of the programs that there was a great deal of excitement was the Medicare coverage for innovative technologies rule, MSID, or breakthrough technologies. And this was, it is essentially in order to give a closer review to securing coverage for breakthrough devices. Getting this is a very important program to our industry. It's a very important program to create the type of innovation that our country needs. Now, despite being written under the former President Trump's CMS, the rule has had bipartisan support in Congress. Recently, the Biden administration put a little bit of pump the brakes on it, put a 60-day review period on it, and I think the public comment just ended. Can you tell us a little bit about anything about its prospects and what we need to do to make sure that the administration implements this crucial reform?
Well, I'm supportive of you on this. And I think that one of the challenges we have, they might be just looking to review at the moment. And as you know, the people that are on the call, not a lot of individuals would understand the mammoth responsibility and expenditure process that CMS oversees. And CMS alone, as an administrative agency, they control a lot of reimbursement rates. And there's always a bit of tension, as you know, between legislators and the appointed. We figure we stood in town halls and we figured we campaigned on a certain premise. They figure they should have lifetime tenure. And so there's a built-in tendency to have a difference of opinion on these things. But I do think that that the individuals at CMS will be open to our suggestions. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's wonderful. And we really appreciate your support, sir, on it. If I can just say, it is, I think, a huge, would be a huge boost for innovation into the technologies that we need to make a healthier America. So we really appreciate your support on that issue. A final question from me is on that revenue side. Changes are coming to the R&D tax credit, which could potentially negatively impact life sciences and other high-tech manufacturers. If you couple that with the president's proposal to claw back some of that corporate rate from the TCJA, profitable companies are facing a lot of exposure. What can you tell us about negotiations to maintain the tax code's incentives to innovate?
Yeah, well, I'm a big R&D guy, as you know. And Massachusetts is the cradle of R&D. And I'm always mindful of the fact that in Kendall Square, I believe that's the largest concentration of R&D in the world. For a very humorous moment, the now speaker, and she was the minority leader, we had a pretty earnest disagreement about the R&D credit. And I could see when she came into the chamber who she was looking for. This is a few years ago when we expanded the R&D. And she said to me, "Your mind is made up, right?" I said, "My mind is made up." And she said, "You're going to take a lot of people with you. You know that." And I was very respectful. And I said, that would be the plan. And I think the whole Massachusetts delegation voted to expand the R&D credit. So, I mean, I'm a believer. And, I'm always described as one of her top lieutenants. She was not happy with me that day, or as we say, that's one of those days when you increase your name recognition in the leader's office.
Yeah. Excellent. So R&D is, we appreciate your support on research and development, and we know that you're very well aware of how critical that is to our ecosystem in Massachusetts. Parting words, anything you want we should be looking out for, thinking about, how can we engage with you better? Do you want to hear more from us in this space?
Yes, I do. I like the industry. No, I like the industry. Time and again, you've demonstrated your value. And, I was very pleased last night when the president talked about issues like DARPA and NIH. I mean, a lot of times that doesn't come up. And when he talked about DARPA last night, I don't know how many people in the chamber could figure out exactly what it was that he was discussing, but he was absolutely right about it. And the role that NIH plays in Massachusetts, we're the 15th largest state in the country. And I think after California, we're the largest recipient of NIH dollars. And it's because of that ecosystem we've constructed as it relates to the great universities and the great hospitals in the state. So in that budget, I mean, the expenditure that we receive is wild. And I intend to maintain that. And when he talked about DARPA, let's face it, the Defense Department is one of the great institutions of research in the world. I mean, the amount of investment that takes place in terms of innovation at the Defense Department, and it's not limited to defense, as you know. I mean, there are some really amazing components of defense expenditure that go well beyond just the defense of the country. And that's an important part of what happens. So I want to hear from you. As I noted, I really like the industry. And the pandemic has reminded us all of just how tenuous our advances can be. So the more I hear from you, the better.
That is wonderful to hear. And I can say with 100% clarity that the industry is very appreciative of your support today, your support in the past, and your support in the future. I really enjoy your partnership, and I thank you so much for taking the time today after a long night and many probably long days ahead. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate your joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Rachel, I'm going to pass it back to you now. And I just want to, again, thank the chairman and his staff for making this possible. What a unique opportunity we just had to hear from one of the most important members of Congress after that speech, and really to get a little look at what's coming in the days ahead. So again, thank you to everybody. And Rachel, let's move forward with the rest of the program.
Well, I'm supposed to follow that. Thanks, Brian. So yeah, that was an incredible presentation. So really so appreciated by the chairman. I think at this point, it's a great opportunity to kind of switch a little more into what we want to talk about post the chairman's presentation, which is, obviously the impact of Brexit and EU MDR. It's a huge impact on the medical device industry as a whole. But what we wanted to focus on today was a little bit of how it impacts US companies, especially. So our first speaker is Ed Ball from RQM Plus, and Ed and I had a great conversation on this last week. He's over there kind of in the thick of things, so he'll be able to give us a really good perspective on what we should be aware of. So Ed, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. And I shall share my screen so I can give you some slides.
I have one by the front door. There's a Marriott one.
Bear with me 1 second. Hopefully that should work for everybody.
Looks great. And just a reminder to everyone to keep yourselves on mute so we don't have background noise.
And I apologize in advance if you hear any additional background noise from me, because being in the UK, it's actually bedtime. So my 3-year-old is going to bed just down the stairs there. So if there are any loud shouts, then that's not me. Sorry. Yes. So we were asked, RQM Plus were asked.
Just to pop you real quick, there's this right side of your slides is just blocked a little bit by, I think, the taskbar. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case that cuts off anything later.
Okay.
Still there a tiny bit. You may want to move it a little bit more.
This
better. That's better. Yep.
Okay. So RQM Plus were asked to come and talk about Brexit and the MDR, and so that is a MDR and IVDR in themselves is a huge conversation, far too much to discuss in the 10-15 minutes or so that we have here. So what I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the similarities and the differences between the MDR and IVDR and what's going on in the UK right now, and just to give you a little bit more detail about what's happening in the UK with respect to the impact of the UK leaving the European Union. So just a very brief summary of who RQM are. Those of you may be aware, we were the combination of R&Q and Matrix, and we came together in 2020 to create a leadership team and an organization that has a range of service offerings across the quality and regulatory landscape, whether that be for specific deliverables or short-term or requirements that are very ad hoc, or whether that be longer-term project teams or continuous support for certain issues and aspects of your work. And that work is delivered by a range of individuals, some with former, or some of us are former competent authority individuals, some of us have worked for notified bodies. All of us have got vast experience across quality and regulatory in medical devices, life sciences, IVDs, etc., etc. So there's a large range of skill sets within RQM and supports our service offerings. And then just a little bit about me, so you know who it is that's talking. Oh, and it would be remiss of me not to mention that we're launching our new website, which will have lots more information, lots more guidance documents and useful links and things like that, and videos for frequently asked questions, and all of the webinars and podcasts and things like that that are available. So please check that out when it goes live, which will be very soon. And there will be some time for questions at the end if there are any. We'll see. So yeah, sorry, a little bit about me. I've been in the medical device industry for 16 years, coming up to 17, I think, actually, which makes me feel quite old. I've had, my experience has been with both competent authority, so the regulator, and in industry across a variety of quality and regulatory type roles, covering a huge range of the quality assurance aspects as well, different aspects of quality systems. I sit on the UK committees for a couple of different standards, specifically the ones that are covering risk management and the quality systems and symbols at the moment. And also I'm a member of the ISO working group for risk management as well, and an auditor for 1345/2016. So now the interesting stuff. So this timeline is a very simplified timeline of what's going on in Europe with respect to the MDR and IVDR. It's not everything, it is a summary, but it gives you some of the key dates. For those of you with class 1 medical devices, I'm sure that all hands are on deck at the moment and you're rushing around well, probably if you're very well prepared, you won't be rushing around. If you're like some of the clients that we're working with at the moment, you will be rushing around trying to make sure everything's in place, that all your procedures are up to date, all the plans are in place, etc. All of the relevant labels have been updated. Those of you with devices with a slightly longer lead time because of your certificates, I've got a little bit more breathing room, and the IVDs have obviously got a little bit more breathing room with respect to the date of application, but maybe not so in some other areas, which I'll come to. So the key dates really are 26th of May 2021 for the MDR, 2022 for IVDR, and then May 24 for the expiration of all the certificates for the previous directives. So at that point, there will be no more medical device directive, active implantable device directive certificates. There'll be none of that available. And 2025 is the end point for the like the sell on of any devices, CE marked devices in the supply chain that were CE marked against those directives. So they can still be in the supply chain, but they have to be removed and sold or just completely removed from 2025 onwards. So the big question, and I'm not going to go into the Good Friday Agreement because that's beyond my capability and knowledge, but what is happening in the UK, and there's a lot, as the chairman just alluded to, in terms of some of the agreements, and it's not just with the US, but there's agreements going on all over the place. There's all sorts of stuff going on with our political class, good and bad. But for the point of this talk, what will you need to do to maintain your presence in the UK, or what will you need to do to enter into the UK market? And I think, so I'll try and answer that question at a high level, but I think the first question is, when is the United Kingdom not united? Because I think this surprised a lot of people in the UK, and I'm not surprised people outside of the UK won't also know some of this, in that the UK is made up of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Great Britain is made up of England, Wales, and Scotland. And that slight bit of differentiation between the different parts of the United Kingdom does have an effect on how things are going, specifically because of the Northern Ireland situation and the impact of the Good Friday Agreement and the inability to put the Northern Irish people at any disadvantage at all. And so that has led to an interesting situation for all regulatory aspects within the UK, but specifically in terms of medical devices and IVDs, it's given us a very interesting situation, which there are pros and cons, lots of pros and cons. So what is happening? What will the regulatory landscape look like? So up until the end of December, we were working to the UK medical device regulation, which was essentially the 3 European directives: the medical device directive, active implantable directive, and the IVD directive. Helpfully, that was called the UK medical device regulation. So hence why I will refer to it as the UK MDR, and hopefully remember to call it the EU MDR. They were amended at the end of last year to start from the beginning of this year. So we have a slightly amended version, which makes a few changes to what we had previously, to allow for the fact that the UK has left the European Union and things cannot stay the same. There will be differences, but to all intents and purposes, the technical requirements are the same, and I'll come to that in a second. There will be something new, but we don't know when, and we don't know what. We can provide educated guesses in that it won't be that different from the EU MDR and IVDR. The MHRA were quite key to the creation and finalization of the 2 new regulations in Europe. So it would be silly for them to then come up with something completely different. It would also require a lot of time and effort to come up with something completely new and different as well. But there are inputs from government and inputs from other areas of the UK that are driving some changes, so it won't necessarily be identical. Some of those we're starting to see already with the introduction of a safety commissioner for patients, but we don't know when that will be. So all we can work off is what we know we have now, which is this slightly amended version of the European directives, which are called the UK Medical Device Regulation. And one big change is that no longer is the CE mark placed on the device, but you have a UK CA mark. If you Google UK CA, you will also find the United Kingdom Cheerleaders Association, and also an association that responsible for doing speed cubing, which is essentially time trials for Rubik's cubes, which I didn't even know existed until I Googled UKCA. So that's what would be affixed to your device to say that you conform to those, to the UK regulations. In terms of classifications, there is no change. So whatever you've got or had or were planning to have under the medical device directives, there's no change. There is still a conformity assessment body. It's the same. The conformity assessment is still the same in essence in terms of what you had previously. So class 1 self-certification, 2A, 2B, 3 would require a notified body, but in this case, they're no longer called notified bodies. They're called UK approved bodies. And those are listed on the UK government website. And so the classifications for IVDs doesn't impact. So anyone that's an IVD manufacturer that's looking at the IVDR and seeing, oh, wow, we now need to change our conformity assessment. We now need a notified body. That change isn't reflected at the moment in the UK regulations. So if you were one of the 80% that has had a reclassification under the IVDR, you are status quo when it comes to the UK for now. The EU require the authorized representative to be based in the EU if you are a non-EU manufacturer. The UK will have a similar responsibility for a UK RP, a UK responsible person. So for non-UK based manufacturers, you will need to have a UK based responsible person who will be responsible for various things. It doesn't carry the same responsibilities as the person responsible for regulatory compliance that's covered in the EU MDR and IVDR, but it does cover responsibility for registering your devices on the MHRA website, on their online registry. So every device that's sold in the UK or placed on the market in the UK has to be registered with the MHRA. And if you are a non-UK manufacturer, then it is the responsibility of your UK RP to do that for you. And so just these are the three key things for me, that these are the three key changes that have happened in that UK medical device regulation that started from January 21. So these are the three things that you need to be aware of if you already have a UK presence. And you'll see here, we have that same timeline, but looking specifically to the UK, we have the transition period ended and the UK, as of January the 1st this year, formally left and we're on their own, which I won't go into the politics of it and my personal feelings, but yeah, not too happy about it, to be honest. We have a grace period for CE mark devices because otherwise that would be foolish. And certainly in the current climate and the current situation, stopping supply chains and removing products from market is not a clever idea. So up until July 2023, CE mark devices can still be placed on the market in the UK. And that's actually, for medical devices, that is a lot longer than some of the other types of products. So things like toys and machinery that also were CE marked, typically they're only allowed a year, whereas for medical devices, we've got till July 23. These three red triangles signify the grace periods for the registration. So for May 2021, which is fast approaching, so there's only a few days left before this deadline hits, this is for implantable devices, active implantables, class 3 devices, class 2B implantable devices, high-risk devices, list A IVDs. September, you have to have registered any of your 2Bs, the remaining 2Bs, the non-implantables, 2As, and list B IVDs. And then January 2022 is when your class 1 devices and general IVDs, if they shouldn't already have been registered with the MHRA, they now need to be registered. And if you are a non-UK manufacturer, that means you need your UK responsible person. Now you're supposed to have it by January 2021, but I don't think anyone will check up on you up to the point where you register, where you definitely need a UKRP. The reason the green dots are still in here, the EU dates are still here, is because it's very applicable for Northern Ireland, because in Northern Ireland, the MDR and the IVDR stay. So now we have GB, where we have they're still called the UK medical device regulations, but they're only really, the technical side of it is only really for GB. And then we have the EU MDR and IVDR applied to Northern Ireland. So we have a two-tier system, which makes things quite complicated when if you're looking to supply or maintain a presence in the whole of the UK. And if you don't supply into Europe already, then it makes it doubly difficult in some respects, but easier in others. So in terms of the conformity assessment process and the bodies that are needed, there are, for the MDR, there are 20 currently for the MDR in Europe, and there are 4 for the IVDR. In the UK, for the new UK process, we've got 2 for devices and 3 for IVDs, and one of those 3 is very limited in scope. So there's not a lot of choice. So if you don't use BSI or SGS, then that is it. They're your 2 choices at the moment for devices. There is talk of others coming on board. TUV sort of have publicly said that they've opened their application, and it's possible others will follow. But these are things to bear in mind in terms of your strategy and planning if you want to stay in the UK, or you're looking to move into the UK market. There's a pinch point, a huge pinch point for certain types of devices that require this approved body conformity assessment. The economic operators, as I mentioned, we've got this new role of the UKRP is thrown in. But if you go into Northern Ireland, you have an importer into Northern Ireland as well, especially if you don't go into Europe and you only go into the UK market, then you have to have an importer just to supply into Northern Ireland. For UK manufacturers, that's very annoying because you've got to have an importer to keep the product in the UK, which is crazy, but it's the way that it's set up in order to avoid various borders, etc., and especially the border between Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is the main issue. So there are lots of different roles and responsibilities. So there's overlap. So there's lots of efficiencies to be gained from looking at what you've done for the MDR and IVDR if you've already been working on that. Now, the conformity assessment process and the obligation to meet technical requirements falls quite heavily on the ability to follow standards and use harmonized standards, and that's a traditional pathway for many manufacturers. There are no harmonized standards for the MDR or IVDR yet. It's in the pipeline. There's going to be quite a long delay till we get most of the key ones. We do have them harmonized standards for the directives, and they're listed in the official journal. And those are the standards that are applicable for the UK medical device regulations because they're based on the directives. So there is some positive news, albeit they're referencing possibly out-of-date standards, which is a problem. So when you're looking at both the EU and the UK, you have to keep monitoring for the update of standards and then keep in mind what's state of the art, but what's also harmonized, and try and balance all of those things as part of your monitoring of the state of the art and your regulatory intelligence. Not necessarily an easy task. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to leave you with a couple of links to some of the articles we've published and the Device Love Live session that we had on this same subject. And just as a final summary, the key thing really is to, as with the MDR and IVDR, you start with looking at your portfolio. What products do you actually supply there? What is their market share? What's their revenue, etc.? Look at it from a risk point of view. What will you need to do to keep them on the market? How beneficial is it for you to keep them on the market there? And then once you have that, then start to look at what you can apply from your MDR work, your IVDR work, if you've already done it, repurpose it, leverage it. And if you're doing that work, maintain your focus on the MDR and the IVDR, because you've got till 2023 to fully transition to the UKCA. So there is no immediate urgency for this. So if you're still working on MDR, don't drop the ball there. That would be foolish, in my opinion. But do start to think about your economic operators. Do start to think about your conformity assessment body if you need them, and your UK and you definitely need a UK responsible person if you're outside the UK, and you definitely do need to register your devices and build that into your plan. And that is the final slide. Hopefully that covered quite a lot of subject content.
That definitely was a lot of information quickly, Ed. That's great. So I would suggest, we're going to move on to our next speaker, but I would suggest if you have questions for Ed, please pop them into the chat and then he can try to answer them there. And otherwise his contact information is obviously in the slide. And Ed, can we make these slides available after the event? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Do you want me to
great.
send them to you, Rachel?
That would be great. And we'll get them out to everyone who registered. So you'll have all the contact information. Thank you so much, Ed. That was fantastic. Okay, so we're going to transition to one last speaker, and Manon Dwyer from Powerling. I am going to invite you to kind of take over the screen and share with us a little bit about your perspective from EU MDR and how you all have been working with that. To see if we can get you on screen. Ed, you may have to stop sharing your screen.
Can everyone see my screen?
No, not yet. Hold on one sec.
Oh.
Let's see. There we go. Perfect. Yes.
All good? Great. Well, thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thank you, MassMEDIC, for this opportunity, and thank you, Ed, for all of this important information. Powerling at its core is a global content service provider, so regulations, I would say, are not part of our core business like RQM+, but so that's why I'm here to focus more on the content aspect of the EU MDR for medical device companies. So kind of a quick agenda. I'm going to just review some of EU MDR's objectives, the impact that it can have on medical device companies, talk about UDAMED, and then go on to the actual impact on content. So some of the just
hang on one second, Manon. I think people
Yes.
cannot see your slides, and that's something on my end. So let me just stop really quickly. I'm gonna stop that again. And then could you try to reshare? I think it was something on my end.
Yes,
sorry about that.
No worries. Let's see. Better? Yes?
I can see them. Can everybody else see them?
Good.
Yes.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, good.
Thank you. Great. So kind of just going over some of EU MDR's objectives, obviously harmonizing the European market, increasing safety following some sanitarian crisis previously, sustaining innovation, creating better access, and facilitating market access to the 24 countries of the EU. So Ed previously, talked about the impact that the EU MDR has on medical device companies. I'm going to focus on the increased demand for technical documentation. The EU MDR are more prescriptive about the required content, and coming from us as a global content provider, the more translation requirements for devices that are currently regulated has greatly expanded, and they're modified to include documentation from the manufacturer, analysis, marketing, authorization of distribution, and in the great majority of cases, the existing technical documentation will need to be updated and revised to comply with the new MDR requirements. And so with these increased requirements of technical documentation, you're getting to look at closer to biotech and pharmaceutical documentation compared to before. And so in terms of UDAMED, so as you may know, UDAMED is the Central European Data Bank that's accessible mostly by everyone. And with the EU MDR, there are stricter requirements on the transparency of performance and of safety of these devices. And everything should be publicly disclosed on UDAMED. And so the idea behind implementing UDAMED is to give consumers and medical professionals manuals the information required to make informed decisions regarding specific medical devices. And so on UniMed, device manufacturers are going to need to upload their clinical investigation, incident reporting certificates, registrations, and patient manuals and documentation. And so, so how does this affect content? So to be compliant, EU MDR does require that medical device contents and documentation should be translated in the official languages of each EU member state where the product will be marketed. So that's up to 24 official languages in total if your product is being marketed in all of the European Union. In terms of, because of all of the increase in technical documentation, this also creates a boost in content generation, which ultimately will be required to be translated. So it's really important to plan ahead and centralize in order to save costs, save time, and optimize costs and consistency. And so the CE mark, the medical device requirement CE mark, has also been updated on the translation requirement side. Well, actually, I'll talk to that next because it's one of my questions. So in terms of looking at our clients that we're currently working with that are trying to get in compliance with EU MDR, I've drafted up a few questions that often come up. So it helps to kind of see the impact that it has. So the big general question, how is translation process for medical device manufacturers affected? So to summarize, translations have always been important in the medical device industry and helping people all over the world identify and use the products, no matter what language they speak. So under the new MDR, translations of IVUs, labeling, and safety information are even more important. And all translations have to be, like I said, available in the languages where they're marketed in the EU. And they must be clear and precise, understandable by anyone. And translations are required prior to CE marking, which was different from before, where it had been required after CE marking. Like previously said, all of this documentation should be stored in the Central European Database of UniMed so that all the data in the applicable languages can be logged and exchanged. Another question is, when should I get started? I can think of one client who we've been working with for over 10 years in ophthalmology. Their deadline is in 3 years, and they started a few months ago with us getting ready because they have over 100 products and patient manuals in 27 languages. So we do really recommend that you get started as soon as possible. At least plan so that you're not rushing at the very end. A next question. So I have commercialized my devices in Europe for years, and I've been CE marked since 2005. Do I need to be aligned with MDR regulation, or does it only concern my devices in development? And the answer is yes. Even if you already have the CE mark, you need to be compliant with the newest EU certification. When we're looking at how long it takes to translate things like IFUs in 24 languages, for an actor like us, it takes 5 to 7 days. Obviously, the planning part is super crucial and establishing the proper tools to optimize the time and the cost. So goes back all again to planning accordingly and getting started as soon as possible. Another question, can Powerling directly integrate my documents in UniMed? And the answer is no. It must come from the device manufacturer who has the legal responsibility for commercialization, but Powerling can centralize the documents. We're certified ISO, and we're ready to be integrated in the database if need be. And in terms of, you know, special restrictions with layout and printing, we do offer services called desktop publishing, which where we deliver our translated documents in different formats in order to respect the end outcome. And yeah, so this client that I mentioned, throughout the years, we've been able to optimize 50% of their translation budget for documentation and guarantee their consistency in their delivery because of some of the tools and elements that we are involved in. So, like I mentioned, the desktop publishing, it reduces errors and minimizes the delays of production. We do create terminology bases and glossaries in order to respect industry terms in different languages, which ultimately force translators to use the correct terms. We have the technology of a translation memory where we're able to leverage 40% of materials and content that's being repeated throughout the manuals, throughout the documentation, so that you're not being charged every time you're translating the same thing. And because we are ISO 17100 certified, we do use only native speakers who are translating the content, in addition to proofreader with experience in the industry. So it's usually an industry expert that's bilingual to make sure that the content has been translated properly and it makes sense in the translated language. And I would say that with all of the new regulations and the new languages that are being added, or the more content that you have to add throughout getting certified with EU MDR, having a partner like a language service provider really helps with the versioning. So as your manuals evolve, sometimes 10 or 15 times, the clients can sometimes be lost in finding the latest version, but tools like a translation memory, we're able to find the latest version and only translate whatever changes are being made. So yeah, so just very brief, straight to the point. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or Sebastian, who isn't here today, but we'd be happy to answer any questions or help you get ready for EU MDR.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Will these slides be available? Are you okay sending them over to me so I can share them with people?
Yes, I will send over a PDF so it's accessible for everyone.
Awesome, that's perfect. So we are actually right up on time, and that's the perfect way to end the program. It's by saying thank you to Ed, thank you Manon, thank you to the chairman who's not with us, but shout out to him anyway. We appreciate all of you spending an hour with us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.